Hey folks, JR here with the FinOps Foundation, coming to you from FinOps X 2024 in San Diego. And I am here with Pravir from Google. Good to see you.
Good to see you, JR.
So we just came off the keynotes, and you were in a panel talking about the future of FinOps. What's been the most surprising thing for you since you got here at the conference?
I think the surprising thing is just the amount of sheer excitement and the turnout. I think the volume of attendance that's just growing, that people wanting to get into the hall and really packing it up. And that's a positive surprisement.
Yeah, because we had to stop in the middle of keynotes and tell people to come in because they were blocking the doors.
Yes. So that was really good.
That was great. So I know you did a bunch of questions on stage, but there were some areas we wanted to dig in more deeply with you. And the first one is like at the core, obviously, of everything you do and why we're all here, which is about customer needs. And specifically, how are you seeing customer expectations evolve around FinOps, and how's that impacting roadmaps, both for your customers and for you?
A lot of our roadmaps, whether it's in the consumer side, enterprise side, all of that is really driven from what are the tasks to be done, what are the CUJs, talking to the customers, taking that as input, and then feeding it into our roadmap. So that's been a perspective throughout at least how I think about it. And I encourage our product managers to also think about it. Like I spent a lot of time in the consumer side working on web search, Google Assistant, and last 3 years working in cloud. But that mindset is still there to really make sure we are talking to our customers, hearing those things, right? So I'll highlight probably 3 things that we are seeing that customers expect from us and perhaps even other cloud service providers at this time, right? First, it's really about how can they continue to run their cloud in a more streamlined manner, especially with respect to cost, right? What they mean by this is, can they have higher utilization of the resources that they are running? Can they remove the waste, remove the idle resources? Can they make sure they can actually have a large portion of their commitment cover the consumption that they have? Right? So running that in a more streamlined manner, like there's just a basic expectation. So whatever things we can help to help them run in a streamlined manner, right? So that feeds into our roadmap. The second expectation that the customers have is we are at this pivotal point of all customers looking at GenAI and thinking about how can GenAI be used to transform their business, both internally in terms of how they do things, as well as whatever is the product that they are building so that they can increase their top line, right? And they are being asked also from their CXOs, please look at GenAI, right? I think it can do this. So everyone is looking at that. But as you're looking at this new technology, you want to make sure you don't burn the bank. Because anytime you start to experiment and look at new technology, it's hard to know what would the cost be of that new technology. How would you even manage that cost, control that cost, right? So they want to innovate with GenAI, but manage the cost, right? So that's an expectation.
Give me everything, everywhere, all at once.
All the customers are like, yes, we'll innovate, we'll try, we'll use your platform, but you need to help us. So
they're asking you to help with the cost. It's sort of a shared accountability model, though,
in terms of providing all the tooling capability,
the tooling and the data.
Exactly, and the data and the clarity on what the cost would be. Don't just tell us to use it and be in the corner and not know about the cost, but provide us the visibility, the granularity, so that then we can manage the cost, right? We need to help them to help themselves.
Yes,
right?
totally.
In that way. And the third is really around predictability. Because every company looks at, from a forecasting perspective, what are they spending now? But even forecasting from a month's perspective, from a quarter perspective, what would their spend be? So as you innovate with new technology, and on one side you want to streamline your cloud spend, it brews this perfect storm of how do you maintain predictability and how do you maintain forecasting that is more accurate? Because internally, the teams that are managing the costs, they are also accountable to their stakeholders, and they can't be like, oh, I think the forecast will be this. It's like, well, that was totally off. So how can we give them better tools for predictability, right? So those are kind of the 3 expectations that we are seeing. And obviously, as I was saying, like as we hear these things from the customers, they start to then feed into the roadmap of all the tools, the applications, and the capabilities we want to provide to the customers, right? And I'll touch upon maybe a few of those that we want to build out, right? First is everything around the cost data. It's just providing that better unit economics of the cost data. So the cost and usage data is both visible and allocated. So all your 100% of your costs, if you can have that at a right granularity, then you can identify what the cost drivers are. Right? Today there are areas where in certain services, you don't have complete coverage, you don't have the right granularity, so it's hard to break down. And it takes time to then understand the data. Like a lot of the effort that's going with the focus, specification, and the schema, that will also help in the easier understanding of that cost data. Right? So us investing in the cost data directly addresses one of those customer needs so that they can run those their instance in a more streamlined way. The second is us making sure that the costs are always efficiently optimized, which means that we can enable the customers to easily purchase CUDs, and which will then enable them to have a large percentage of their consumption being covered by CUDs. So this includes us providing the tooling so that they can easily buy the CUDs. They can also know when to buy the CUDs. Before they buy the CUD, what will happen? Like kind of a what-if scenario analysis of how much will it happen? You should not be waiting for the next billing monthly cycle to then
just
know.
Just-in-time purchasing.
Exactly, and then they can make a case for why we should do this, right? And so providing all the tooling and the richness around this. And we have a lot of exciting announcements also in terms of us improving those capabilities in terms of cost optimization and purchasing CUDs. And the third is people just expect this from Google in general, which is around how do you, like, what are you doing to apply the best of Google technology to FinOps, to the offerings that you have, to the billing console. We started with like anomaly detection that at Google Next we rolled out as a private preview, where various other areas we were applying the same anomaly detection, like fraud and abuse detection. The ads product area applies this as well, and we brought this to Google Cloud as well in terms of providing anomaly detection not just detection, but also root cause analysis with it. Like when there's an anomaly,
having a problem is just, or knowing there's a problem is just the first step. You need to understand and why to prevent it in the future,
so that you can actually take actions on it, right? And the root and anomalies could be spikes going up, spikes going down, knowing what is causing it and knowing that in real time so that you can do cost optimizations earlier. You can have like then programmatic access to it with like having a pub sub so that you don't have to go to the console all the time, but there's a push mechanism.
You put the data in the path of where you're already working, so you don't have to go out somewhere.
And you can then choose how you want to act on it, right? And the second thing in terms of bringing the best of Google is we have one of the industry-leading Gemini 1.5 Pro models.
Yes, I've heard about this.
How are you applying? Like customers ask us, what are you doing in terms of applying that for improving FinOps? And if you think about the informed pillar, like really understanding the cost data, there's so much we could do applying Gemini to make it not just easier and faster to understand data, but it also democratizes it, that it's not just the FinOps practitioners who are understanding the data, but all the stakeholders, if they can understand the data as easily and not just go to the FinOps, the Center of Excellence team, that makes it really pervasive throughout the whole company in terms of how they manage cost. Right? So a lot of the interesting things in our roadmap, again, tie back to kind of what customers tell us.
Well, so there's a theme in there, there's a few themes that are beyond something you can solve with tooling or with AI even, which is, like you talked about committed use discounts, CUDs, and maximizing the use of those and making sure you're using them to the right extent. But then the perennial challenge there with all those types of commitments is, well, do I optimize my usage and utilization before I make the commitments? Obviously, you want to do as much of that as possible, but that requires engineering effort. It requires just changes to architecture sometimes. So, like, how are you seeing there's a conversation that has to happen internally as well of, yes, we could go and optimize these things before we commit, but frankly, we got to go build this new thing with AI, or we need to deliver this, new feature, or there's carbon reduction considerations, whatever they are. So how are you seeing your customers use your data, use your features, but take that internally and balance act between when do I put engineering effort into reducing usage and when do I just make a commitment via CUD or additional discount vehicle?
I mean, this is the classic case of please innovate, experiment fast because our competitors are doing it, and worry about the cost later. Keep doing the informed ignoring phase for a while.
I love that one.
And we'll come back to the cost, first increase the top line. But what then happens is, if you haven't followed the best practices, it's much more harder to then say, oh, I should have gone back and done my labeling and tagging in a different way, because then how do I get the cost allocation assigned at the right granularity that I can tie the revenue to the cost and to the business units as well, right? So while this is happening, even the motivations of why it's needed to be doing the FinOps practice upfront are clear, because your cloud costs are the biggest OpEx that most companies have. And with the macroeconomic conditions, right, the motivations of doing it is clear. There are still challenges or the headwinds that get in the way. And those are especially in the, from a time and effort perspective, in the sense that it takes a while for the FinOps users or the practitioners to first establish the culture within the company.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering about.
And then it's also hard for them to enable the stakeholders to inform and understand the cost data, set up the guardrails and the practices and the processes around it. So there are these headwinds, right? But the more we can do to improve upon those headwinds, and as we improve upon those, what will happen is we'll have this notion of shifting left, right? So first of all, how would we improve some of these things, right? The way you improve it, if it's harder to understand the cost data and harder for you to explain that cost data to the stakeholders, then as a CSP, as a cloud service provider, what can we do so that you can understand the data much more easily, right?
So would you say the most important and most influential, impactful way to influence engineering action on cost efficiency is to provide the best data? Is that the most important thing? Or what's the one thing you would say if you're struggling with that?
There's never a one thing.
That's why I'm trying to corner you with one.
It's like, oh, you have 2 children, pick one, right?
Okay.
So yes, there is.
Where do you start, I guess?
Yeah, where do you start? You want to make sure the data is granular, the data is accurate, because everything feeds off of that. Because even if you have data coming in 1 hour latency as opposed to 24 hours, if the data is not accurate, what good is that?
Yeah,
right?
you lose trust in it. And then,
you lose the trust and then you ignore it, right? So that's your given. But then you also want to set up the right culture and practices in terms of how do you get teams motivated to do it? Because we all, whichever company or organization you are in, we are all humans running and working in that company. So you have to set the right incentives and the motivations in place that then you will actually look at that data. You will actually act on that data, right? It's not just because that's a necessary step. It's not the complete thing that is required to solve the problem. So you have to set up the right processes and the motivations that then enable it, but then you need the necessary condition of having the data in the right shape and easy understanding of that data.
And you said, excuse me, in an interesting role, because you're an engineering leader delivering features and data for your customers, but then you also run engineers internally who are presumably managing cloud spend, and you've got to, dog food, drink your own champagne, whatever expression you want on that. So on the topic of data, I mean, we talked a lot around granular data, and we're starting to talk about the focus data, the open source data that Google is putting out. Where do you see that data, focus data, or just, general cloud billing data going in the future?
So I think, first let me start even with a personal story.
Love it.
14, 15 years back, I was involved with Guha on the schema.org Foundation, which is how do you get structured data annotated on the internet? So if you think about who's the author of a web post or a web page, what are the reviews and rating, it was all unstructured data floating around, right? So we came up with the schema.org as a standard where you would have, similar to Focus, specifications of what does the labeling for review mean? Is it camel case, uppercase, underscore? Lots of heated debates around these things.
The arguing about naming.
Is it a 5-point scale, 10-point scale? But with the involvement of various other companies like Microsoft, Yandex coming together, and the web participating in it, we have seen the cycle flow in terms of you put in investments now, it lays the level playing field for next level of innovation that happens after that, right? So a lot of the work that we are doing in Focus like we know how many of these things play out, and we are confident in. That's why we wanted to start on it from the very get-go and partner with the FinOps Foundation for focus. And we are in it for the long run as well, right? Because improvement on the data will also get many of the customers to then look at the data of, oh, I'm getting this, because as like we have many companies, like today morning we heard from Uber. We started on AWS. We are now on Google Cloud. We are also on Azure.
All the clouds.
Right, all the clouds. So everyone is on multi-cloud for different reasons. So you'll be able to look at the data in a standard schema that is coming from different cloud service providers and make sense of it, and then challenge and require the cloud service providers to do more.
Yes.
Right? You would then say, well, if you can compare the cost and usage data coming from a cloud service provider, then you can make those comparisons and actually challenge the service provider for the workload that you're using. You can ask them and require them, please provide this data in a shorter latency to us, right? It starts to breed that next level of innovation, and we're really excited about that because that's how the whole industry moves forward and gets better.
It is an interesting dance with that data, because with the stage at where focus is, it's really just dealing with table stakes.
Yes.
Like, how do we make sure that my Google Cloud project aligns to my Azure subscription, aligns to my AWS linked account, and there's some basics in there. How do we make sure that the Google spend aligns to the other cloud spend and those things? But I think that's where it gets interesting, is the higher order effects of where can we start to translate that beyond just conversations with the FinOps team and engineering, but larger business conversations where you're having product decision debates with leadership, with engineering teams, with even the sourcing and procurement teams who are going out to negotiate with their vendors ahead of time in a common unified language, where you're not dropping a report on the table from one team and they're like, that's not the figure I understood because yours is amortized and mine is this, and all these things. So I think that the future of focus is like unlocking those internal conversations, in some ways evolves.
And this happens all the time. Like, you look at revenue data. If you just say revenue, are you talking about gross revenue, list revenue, net revenue, right?
Right, that's exactly the challenge. Even in a single cloud provider, not to name you or anybody else, but there can be different types of dollars in the same one because of how it's calculated. And none of them are wrong. The data's not wrong. It's just through a different lens, essentially.
Or even the price is one, right? Where is it a list price, contractual price?
Oh, yes. Are we showing the discounts or not? And all of that stuff. So, okay, GenAI.
Yes.
I'm wondering if you can speak to both sides of this. So, what are you doing to empower and enable your customers to transform their businesses there? But then how are you, as we've been talking about, also enabling the shared accountability model where you're helping them make sure that they're doing it in a predictable, allocatable, optimized way, that they're getting the right value out for the spend in?
I think I love this framing of, which is FinOps for AI and AI for FinOps, right?
Exactly.
Because then you're like, aha, there are two things, and please don't just keep crossing wires. And it's like, which conversation were you in, right? So having those kind of pillars helps in frame that conversation, right? So let me start a little bit with kind of FinOps for AI, which is, as the customers want to use AI to innovate, how can they apply the best of FinOps practices to control and manage that cost, right? And a lot of it, we can help as cloud service providers for that. Like, one example, we actually announced it at Google I/O, was as you use GenAI, if you're making repeated calls to GenAI where your input prompt is not changing much, so then why do you need to keep incurring that cost of the input cost? So we launched and announced this thing called context caching.
I was just going to say, it sounds like caching. This is like caching for AI. That's what was in my mind.
If your CSP can context cache and not charge you for that same input.
You've already asked me for this. I'll just give it back to you.
I'm already providing this as...
And that helps you as well with your own internal capacity management and carbon and all these things.
All of that, right? So there are so many ways like this of we can provide that value. And secondly, us making sure that we are providing the granular data that distinguishes your input cost and output cost. So there's a lot we can do in terms of enabling the FinOps for AI, right? And then on the second pillar, which is around AI for FinOps, right? So there's a lot we can do, and even some of the customers are starting to apply this. Oh, I got the cost usage data. Now I will get it in focus schema. Can I apply GenAI to make sense of it, right? But they shouldn't just have to do it. Like, as a CSP, we should be able to apply GenAI in terms of enabling and answering those questions, right? If you take that informed pillar within FinOps and you say, if I just want a data question answered, like why did my bill increase this month? Very simple question.
Yep.
It might take you like 10 minutes to figure that out with the right slice and dice, what filters I need to turn on and figure out, oh, I can see. But now imagine you can ask this question in a natural language way.
Yep.
GenAI works the magic, gets you that answer right then and there with the right charts and the graphs to back it up so that you can then do more drill downs, right? That's applying AI to FinOps.
Yeah,
right?
and I'm always that person too in this whole area that I have that like I'm just old enough where I have healthy skepticism about the new thing, and I think about whenever I think about AI, it's like, oh, it was containers however many years ago, or cloud before that, or whatever one. But I think what you laid out is probably one of the best arguments when you're talking about it only it takes you 10 minutes but you can get it faster. Is the whole point of FinOps, as we talked about this morning, is making it everyone's job.
Yes.
And so GenAI can help with the accessibility of the data to more people.
More people
who
as
may
well,
not
exactly.
have the BI skills or the SQL skills or whatever it is to get that data out. So if you can empower more executives, more business people, more people to self-serve, so they can come in, hopefully through a language of focus that's normalized, they can come into the room of conversations all on the same page, rather than being like, hey, I need this data from you before we can talk.
And that self-serve, like the 10 minutes I spoke about, that's for the FinOps practitioner or the user.
Yeah,
the CXO is like, I don't even know where to start. I need to talk to the FinOps. So it democratizes
that
meeting
access. To explain what I need, and then that's great. So let's maybe wrap with the future of FinOps more broadly, right? I mean, across AI, across the culture, across data, like, what are the trends, and where do you see the biggest impact for this practice of managing the value of cloud going from your perspective in the coming, let's say, 5 years?
Yep. I think I'll call it maybe 3 to 5 years. 5 years
That's
in
maybe
tech
too far.
is so long
I know.
that the whole world changes
fair.
in so many ways. Like 5 years back, I guess we were in COVID. Before that, right? GenAI didn't exist.
Let's do 2 years. How about 2 years?
yeah, 2-3 years, right? First, maybe I'll highlight, let's say 3 to 4 trends that we'll see, right? Okay. First is just AI for FinOps automation. So we are seeing AI and ML having this paradigm shift, GenAI playing that pivotal role, everyone looking at using GenAI in all sorts of different ways, because what it has done is it has democratized access. Earlier, you would have a small team that created a model and then solved the problem. Now, the underlying model itself is so much higher in quality and capability that you don't have to go and tweak the model.
Yep.
You just have to use the model and apply prompts and use it in whichever domain and use case you have, right? So that democratization has enabled and causing this paradigm shift across the world, the whole tech industry, right? Now, if you take FinOps, you have the inform, optimize, and operate pillar in FinOps. Across all these 3 pillars, I posit that we'll see a revolution and a big change in how these practices are done, right? I'll just give one example to put a teaser here, right? Which is really around, you take the inform pillar. And we talked about kind of this example of if I can ask a data question and get an answer immediately, like why did my this month's bill increase? Then that's game changing, right? It reduces the time, it makes it self-service, and it enables all the stakeholders to be on the same page that I don't have to now get the data and then find time with you on the calendar and explain it to you. You can also get to that data, right? So it changes the whole conversation. Companies will easily make data-driven decisions and then be able to do cost optimization with real-time data, right? As you provide more and more data, right? So AI-driven FinOps automation would be one trend. The second trend we'll see more and more of will be shifting left. Where today we look at, we started to build something on cloud spend increased, now it's the biggest OpEx, how do we manage that cost? Then, let's establish a FinOps practice, let's reduce that cost down, we have 2 levers, let's get into better negotiation with rates, let's use committed discounts that will bring that rate down, let's look at usage as a pillar. In the usage, we have idle resources, we can increase utilization. But what is not happening is, why did you even come to the place where your spend was high that you had to do this? Could you pull that in? Like that is what we call like shifting left, where you could say, if cost optimization is important for you, then first, not just look at the best practices in architecture, but also apply that for your initial designs from both
Yes,
engineering and
absolutely.
product perspective. Because a little bit what happens today is, oh, but I've already gone down that path and I'm so far along, now I can't change my architecture for best
If
practices.
the FinOps team comes in at the end and says, hey, we got to cut costs like this, you're basically asking me to redesign the
Yeah,
application.
redo the whole thing,
Like,
and that's
let's
an
start from the
opportunity
beginning.
cost.
Yeah.
Right? So shifting left as a culture will continue to happen more and more. And I think the first piece of GenAI will also help drive that, because people know, like as you start to experiment a little bit with GenAI, it's going to cost. So how can you put that and infuse that in the design phase, right? So that's the kind of a second trend of shifting left.
Okay.
The third will be around sustainability,
Yeah.
right?
Carbon aware FinOps and all of that.
Carbon
yeah.
aware, but where that push will come from, we'll have two catalysts in that space. The first catalyst will be from Europe in terms of government policies that really push, whether it's from recommendations or legislations or policies, they will push for this. We have CSRD, which is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which will require large companies to report on greenhouse emissions starting this year in 2024, right? So that's one example where then the customers care about, okay, what are we doing from a carbon emission perspective? And then environmental policies, and then environmental policies that start to influence the FinOps decisions. And customers and even the employees of that company, it's surprising, but for many people, but it's actually morale boosting to know that our company is really doing well for the environment, and they also put pressure on what are we doing from a sustainability perspective. And then eventually, now if I take more of a 5-year time of a horizon, environmental emissions and concerns will not just be restricted to carbon emissions. It can expand well beyond that. It may include how much water you are spending on data center or other aspects of it, right? So we don't know how that evolves, but sustainability would be a third theme. And to put a ribbon on top of all this, the trend that doesn't go away is really what I call back to the basics, which is better unit economics, right? Whichever field you take, there's always the back to the basics. Like you take fashion, oh, we are back to the basics, or this thing is back in
baggy
fashion.
jeans.
Yeah, exactly. So that basic unit economics will continue, where you want granular cost data that is timely, that is coming in, because it becomes the necessary step for all the things you want to do on top. From forecasting, from anomaly detection, from understanding the cost data, having it in real time. You want to make sure you have the unit economics laid out. And like if you take, for example, a large company that is running restaurants across the whole world, they would love to know that if I have one restaurant in San Diego Gaslamp District, how much is the cloud cost for that restaurant? And how much of that cost, what is the revenue that it's driving? Is that greater or less? Is it efficient? Is it running efficiently? What more can I do, right? So everyone has these types of questions. So continuing this trend of having better unit economics and the efforts that all of us are doing on focus with schema that is standard across in how we provide that data will help enable and foster the right collaborations and the right give and take between customers and the CSPs to push towards better unit economics. So those are the 4 trends in terms of AI innovation for FinOps, automation, sustainability, shifting left, and then better unit economics.
I think you put the right one at the end, because spending more isn't necessarily a bad thing if it's driving better business outcomes. And if you're too focused on cost and cost savings, you can miss the forest for the trees. So getting to that value-based unit economic approach, I think, is the ultimate correct measure for you. So,
completely agree. And it's really about maximizing value, right? There's good spend and bad spend, right? Good spend being that you know that I'm spending this and this is causing this much increase in revenue. So it's okay to see increases in that good spend. With bad spend, you want to shut down those idle resources and everything and remove that.
Reinvest somewhere else.
Exactly. And then if you can identify and distinguish what is good spend and bad spend, once you get the fully loaded, allocated, visible cost that is granular enough, then you can delineate, oh, this is good spend, this is bad spend, and then take the right actions on it, right? That enables you to then maximize the value that you want to achieve.
Pravir, thank you so much for the time. It was great to have you here, and hopefully we'll see you in Barcelona for FinOps X Europe.
Yep. No, thank
All
you,
right.
JR.
Thanks so much.
Love talking with you.
Yeah, you too.